Monday, June 26th. So, yes, it's been another week between sessions, and I do regret, not regret, I guess I kind of have, some remorse about not staying consistent with the whole schedule here, but there's a lot going on, in the summer, and some of us, got sick in the family, stuff like that. So we're just trying to recover now. But I do appreciate the faithfulness in watching and watching and paying attention to the episodes and giving me the encouragement and everything else that some of you are doing. So thank you for that. It helps me to stay motivated to want to do this work and to be a voice out there for those of us who feel like the things that are said in sessions like these just aren't being said enough or at all. So hopefully we can get into some deeper stuff as we move forward. But today we're looking at power in human systems, still looking at redeeming power and understanding authority and abuse in the church by Diane Langberg. We're in I believe it's chapter 6, and I always get thrown off because the session numbers are one off because I did a prelude or whatever. So yeah, so we're in chapter 6, power in human systems. Now, a couple of sessions back, we looked at the definition of what systemic abuse is. We'll kind of cover some of that again this morning, but we're going to focus more on the issue of power. And if you remember, power and control are the two things that motivate those who abuse. It motivates those people more than anything else. And in the past, I've said, like, most people think about abuse as being about anger, right? Someone's angry, and so they're abusive, and it's just because of their anger. And so mistakenly, people get sent to anger management when they're abusive. It's like, oh, you need to manage your anger. But it's really not about anger. It's about power and control, which is why we have batterers intervention programs, which are to address people and their need for power and control and how they're using that or utilizing that need to abuse others, right? And so what we're looking at here is how power is used to control people and through the use of systems. Okay. So what I want to do first though is read from Mark chapter 3. We're going to kind of use this as our base passage today just to look at how this cycle of abuse can happen in a system and even how Jesus dealt with it and how we can deal with it. That's kind of the goal of this morning's session. So we're looking at Mark chapter 3, starting at verse 1. Again, reading from the Tree of Life version. Yeshua entered the synagogue again, and a man with a withered hand was there. Now there were uh, now some were carefully watching him to see if he would heal him on Shabbat, the Sabbath, so they might accuse him. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Stand up here in the center." Then he said to them, "Is it permitted on Shabbat to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to kill?" But they kept silent. After looking round at them with anger, grieved by their hardness of heart, he says to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out right away with the Herodians and began plotting against him, how they might destroy him. Right. So what we have here is description of what the system, the religious system, looked like in Jesus' time. Okay. And so if you're not familiar with some of the basics here, let me just go over that. Shabbat, Sabbath day, that was the day to gather at the synagogue. Okay. And nowadays in Christianity church, most people meet on Sunday. Shabbat is Saturday. Saturday, Sabbath uh, would start Friday evening. Their days, they have a lunar calendar. They still run it this way now, where they start days based on when the moon rises and when the moon sets. Okay, so not so much about the sun. So sunset to sunrise. No, sorry, sunset to sunset would be a day then, right? That's kind of the idea there. And so Friday night when the sun sets, that's when Sabbath starts, and Sabbath ended when the sun set on what we call Saturday. Okay. And so on those days, day of rest, no work was to be done following the prescribed order as described in the Torah by Moses after they leave the land of Egypt, and God is establishing rules of order for their community. And if you know like their history, like they had a hard time following a lot of the rules and laws, and we'll look at some of that later today also. They fell into a lot of sin as a nation. They were taken away into exile, the Babylonians or the Assyrians first, and the Babylonians, and then slowly they started to return to Jerusalem, back to Israel. Then it seems that by the time Jesus comes around, there's a Roman occupation going on. The Greeks eventually took over. Well, let's say the Persians, the Greeks, and then the Romans took over. And so under all this time, the Jewish people in Israel have been under the control of other nations. But despite all that, they reestablished their faith and established an order in which they were pretty faithful to the interpretations of scriptures that the leaders had at that time. Okay. And the way their system worked is on Sabbath, they had the day off, they didn't work, and it seemed like the Romans were okay with that as long as there wasn't, any revolution problems, people were trying to become king or whatever. And so they had their Sabbath days, and one of the traditions was to go to synagogue to hear Torah read, right? So this is where Jesus is fitting into the system. He goes into the synagogue, and if you think of a synagogue not as a temple synagogue, like a local place of gathering, a local place like you have local churches today. So wherever he was, I forget now exactly where he was. I don't know. I think he was in Jerusalem. Might be wrong. Yeah, because if he was in Jerusalem, the text would have said he was in the temple. But he was somewhere where there was a synagogue. He went there, and there was a man with a withered hand. And what the system had designed at that point was this idea that nobody should perform any kind of work on the Sabbath, any kind of work, even if it's the work of God, even if it's a miracle. That miracle should wait to the next day. That's the way the system was working at the time. And what Jesus asked them is important because what Jesus asked them indicates that he knows that the way that the system is set up currently doesn't match up with the teachings that we have that actually set up the system. So, in other words, you have a system that's based on teachings, ideas, and not everything is outlined in the Torah. Right at that time, you had the Talmud, you had the Mishnah, you had different commentaries, different teachings, rabbis. Just like we have today, they would read the scriptures, and they would say, "Well, Rabbi, we're not supposed to do any work on Sabbath, but what if X Y Z happens?" And so I was taught a while back that there was a general rule, general consensus that if there is a situation to save a life, where a life could be saved on the Sabbath, then that should be done. That's not considered work. It's considered a mitzvah. It's a blessing. It's a good thing to save a life. And I believe in the scripture the example is like if a goat falls in a pit, do you leave the goat in the pit to the next day, or do you rescue the goat? And the idea is you rescue the goat. And Jesus, that's what he's asking here. He said, "Is it permitted on Shabbat to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to kill?" Now you're looking at a man with a withered hand. You're like, how does this have? What does this have to do with saving a life? Well, the idea behind that is that a man with a withered hand can't work. So a man with a withered hand is a beggar. A man with a withered hand is more of a drain of society. But not just that, in his own life, in his own personal, being, sense of value and worth of who he is, a man with a withered hand can feel like a dead person, can feel like he's worthless because he's begging, he's asking for money, he's because he can't work, he can't go out there and do the kinds of things that involve physical labor. Right? There weren't a lot of jobs back then, as I understand, that involved working without being able to use your hands. I could do it with a withered hand. It would be difficult, but I could do it. Right? Just teaching, typing, you could probably figure it out. Dictation, all that kind of stuff. But back then, this idea of saving this man's life is actually it's centered around the idea that it's going to get him to go back to work. It's going to restore his sense of value and purpose, right? By restoring his hand, Jesus is doing a great act of mercy for him and bringing him back into a place where he can be a part of society, and fit into that the society's purposes and narratives for him being a male at that point. And if you notice that when he says this, he asks them, "Is it good or evil to do this kind of thing?" They kept silent. And then Jesus says, after looking around with them in anger, grieved by the hardness of their heart, he says to them, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched out, his hand was restored. and then the plotting began on how to destroy Jesus. And so what we see here is a system that has been established, and in this system, certain people have power. And what who were mentioned here are the Pharisees and the Herodians, right? So these are groups of people. Herodians was reference to people who kind of followed the way of Herod. You know, they loved what Herod was doing. Herod was a person who, as a leader, was very smart. He put all the money, a lot of money in taxes that were gained through taxes, into rebuilding the temple. It's why the disciples said to Jesus at some point, like, "Don't you see? Look how beautiful this temple is." And it's because he literally put gold in the walls, which is what motivated the Romans to rip it apart stone by stone. But it was beautiful. And so there was a sect of people that just followed him, Jewish people that followed him. They even called themselves Herodians, right? They followed his ways, his teachings, or whatever. Kind of like Jesus had his disciples. Uh, Although Herod wasn't exactly a rabbi. But anyway, so that's a group, the group of people who then see what's going on and say, we have a problem. We have somebody who is working outside of our system, outside of our control. And it's not that Jesus did anything wrong. It's that Jesus disobeyed what they wanted him to obey. They would rather Jesus say, "Okay, yeah, you know what? You're right. I'm going to follow what you have to say about the Sabbath, and I'm going to wait till sunset, or I'll wait till tomorrow, and then I'll heal this guy." And so Jesus didn't want to fit into that system, because Jesus says that system itself is corrupt, because it's purposely keeping people away from doing what is good and instead doing what's evil, and that's ignoring the needs of others. And it's a bigger picture when it comes to that. It's just this idea that you are ignoring what you're supposed to be taking care of, even on the Sabbath, right? So it's a larger social commentary about that. So now that we have this story here, what I want to do is look at the material from the book, and then try to see how all these pieces fit together. I also have a video clip that I want to show later, about abuse in the church, and just to highlight how bad it can get, right? Because we want everything to be modern, everything to relate to us today. Now, just some basics, right? What is a system? It's a combination of parts that work together to form a whole. A few weeks ago, we had this talk about systems, and I talked about an engine. We just were blessed to be able to purchase a new car, through financing, whatever. So it's not ours yet. We got to pay the bills, right? But it's there. We have it. And I had to sell my old car, and I was really familiar with the system of the engine of my old car. It was a 2006 Honda CRV. I had actually taken apart the manifold and had to change gaskets and change ignition coils, and I know where the alternator is and the transmission, and the battery and the power steering, and I looked at all that. I learned a lot about that particular system, and one of the reasons why I sold the car is because it was making a lot of noise, and it's the power steering system. It's got a problem. It's like it needs a new pump, and I could change the pump, but then was it really worth it? Could just sell it, get a new car. The car is 17 years old already. I was really familiar with the system. I opened up the hood of this new car. It's a hybrid, and we wanted to get something that was going to be better for us, gas mileage, and better for the environment altogether, and all that kind of stuff, which matters to us. And so I open up the hood, and I'm looking at this, and I can picture it in my head, and I'm like, what in the world? What is this system right here? Like, how does this thing work? I see fluids, pink fluids, and containers of fluids, and I see I think a battery, and there's another battery in the trunk, and looking at it, I was like, how many cylinders are here? And I'm just like, I was a little overwhelmed with it, right? For 17 years, I've had my car, and I'm looking at the system and how it works. And if it's not going well, I can figure out what's going on with it. I can fix that part. The point is, a system is it needs to work together. Whether you understand it or not, all these parts are there, and if one part has got a problem, you got to deal with that one part, or else the whole system's going to fall apart. And humans work the same way. We work in systems, right? So the very base model system, the basic one, is our families, right? We have family systems. And then I was just trying to relate to like church ideas, and getting it bigger. So number two, like you bring a family system into, you have like Bible studies and small groups. That's another system. Then you have churches, and then you have even larger systems like governments and government agencies. And within all this, there's categories, right? Within your family, you have your system of just your nuclear family, the one that you live with, the one that's at home, right? For us, it's three. We have that system. But then when we go out to other parts of the family, we unfortunately missed a graduation celebration for my niece Sangeeta. Congratulations on graduating high school. It's a big deal. I know so many people that just don't even make it past that point. So it really is an accomplishment you should be proud of. But you know, when I'm in that part of the system, right, with that family, if I was there, I kind of have an idea of how that would work, what that would look like, the kinds of conversations we might have, the kind of jokes we might tell. The same thing goes with when we're hanging out with my wife's family. Usually with like New Year's Eve and stuff like that, and birthday parties we do. And so the systems grow outside of the one nuclear system, right? You have other settings in which a system will work, and when you go into that system, you know your role, you know your place. It's like going to church, right, or going to a Bible study. When you're first meeting with a Bible study, you're first going to church, or let's say it's at work. You're doing a work meeting. You have an idea how things are going to play out, who's going to say what, who's going to do what they're going to do, who's not going to speak, who you're going to have a problem with, who you're not going to have a problem with, what your role is in the system. In our family, like our system is I think unique, in it's different from what my wife grew up with and what I grew up with. And so we have a lot of open communication in our system. We have a lot of freedom in our system. We don't put restrictions on each other, and we don't tell each other what to do. If we have a concern, we'll share that. If we have ideas, we'll talk about that, certainly. But it's way different from the system that we grew up in. And my wife and I had to be intentional about that. But that's how systems work. Okay? That's what systems are. And so if you look at your systems, sometimes people don't know how to break free of their system, the pattern of the system. Say you grew up in a family where you played a certain role within your system, and and then you get married, and then you find yourself playing the same role, or you witness the role that your mom played or your dad played, and so you start repeating those patterns. And that's really, we're talking about systems, patterns, and interactions um, within our society. Now, systemic abuse applies when the system that is designed to serve people is instead destroying them, right? So, if my family and design, okay, so I want to slow down here. So, when she said designed, right, who designed the system? And she's referring back to chapter 1 or 2 when she's talking about, about Dr. Langberg, about how we as people were designed by God. Now that's the premise, right? That's the premise. If you don't believe in God, don't believe in that, believe in evolution, whatever, so that's going to be a different perspective, right? You can think of a system, the family system, in terms of coming from evolution, as being about survival and adaptation, right? And so how a family has formed, how people have evolved over time, even in their behaviors and their psychology and their thinking, in their emotions. Everything's done out of a need for self-preservation. Okay. Now, from coming from a perspective where we believe that God created human beings, then we have to understand what He created us for, and that was to be the reflection of His image and likeness on this earth. And so that's what the system was designed for. The system was designed for the mother and father to reflect the image of God and his likeness, right? So how he would do things and what he's like and his behavior, his emotions, his reactions. The design was meant for that. The design of the family, so that the children can see the parents reflecting the image and likeness of God, and so they can also learn to be that, and then they can, as they grow older, eventually have their own families and continue that pattern reflecting God's image and likeness in the earth. And that's what the system was designed to do, the family system, and every other system that would come out of that, right? But very early on, before the children were even first born, the system was ruined by sin, by disobedience. And so the image and likeness of God was not replicated anymore. Instead, what was replicated was a system, or sorry, an image of brokenness, an image of disobedience, an image of hatred, even, right? You can see how Cain kills his brother Abel out of this jealousy. And you gotta understand, it's not just something he's born with, it's something they're going to see. Jealousy and hatred and anger as they grow up, they see the fighting between Adam and Eve. If you think that their only sin was was the sin of disobeying God and eating from the wrong tree, you're mistaken. Once sin entered the world, once sin entered the humans, I should say, they just entered the humans. They were going to continue to be sinful, right, and reflect the wrong thing to their family. If that wasn't the case, if they were just perfect after that, then where would Cain and Abel just learn sin? I mean, I guess they could just be born with it, and the doctrine of I forgot what it's called now. This that you're born with sin, all that's a total depravity, all that kind of thing. I guess can be an issue there to explain it. Anyway, funny trail, rabbit trail. But ultimately, that's what systems were designed for, to reflect the image of God. But they've become this where we instead reflect the image of sin and disobedience and all kinds of stuff to each other. So that's sad. But that's what she means by design. And so she said it's designed to serve each other. Systems are designed to serve each other, but instead it destroys them. It rips away humanity, it rips away their voice, their sense of dignity, their worth, their sense of worth. And ultimately she's talking about the system of the church, the community is supposed to do that. But instead, when abuse enters into the system, it rips that all away from them. Okay. So that's systemic abuse. So some examples she goes into. Some of these are pretty well known. The book, again, was written in 2020, so it's not too old. It's 3 years old. So I think some of these examples are still in our mind. But one of them, she talked about a visit where that she had to what was called Burma, now is called Myanmar, a nation out there in Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, this country is designed to abuse its people. Okay, now a lot of governments in the world can be abusive. There's systemic abuse, and so excuse me, so on and so forth. But not all of them are designed to specifically abuse their people. Some examples. Okay, uh, she said, a Burmese gentleman described to me examples of a leader strategy. And strategy here is to have power and control over their people. One day, the people of Myanmar woke up and were instructed on the whim of the top general to drive on the opposite side of the road. Okay, just in the morning, a guy says, "Okay, I want everybody to drive on the other side of the road." What's the point of that, right? It's just to exhibit your own power and control over people. Like, never mind what's going to happen, how it's going to be confusing with the people who are driving it to go through, right? If that happened here, like one day someone woke up and was like, hey, you're going to drive on the other side of the road. Obviously, here we'd protest and all this kind of stuff, but let's say we didn't have the ability to do. In Myanmar, they didn't have the ability to do. It's the army who's there. They've got tanks, they've got guns, they've got people standing around to control, the people and to make sure that they obey. And so they just start having to drive, and it says that the edict had to be changed back quickly due to the overwhelming number of accidents, right? So eventually it's like too much damage is happening. Okay, we'll change it back. No consideration for what the people are going to go through, but yet that's what the system is designed there to do, is to control them and to exhibit power over them. Just continuing on, he also told me that all Burmese get a retirement pay equivalent to 10 cents a month. Wonderful, right? Oh, here, you're going to retire, here's 10 cents a month. And that it costs 20 cents to ride the bus to the only bank where they can collect the retirement pay. And the country has purposeless forced labor. I watch men and women carry heavy boulders from one side of the road to the other, then be forced to carry them back. Dr. Langberg saw this herself, right? You can imagine like other countries like in Cuba or Venezuela or the kinds of oppressive nations that are out there, nations in Africa, where there's total domination by the government. So a system there, a government, as Paul described it in Romans chapter 13, is supposed to protect people from evil, not be evil itself. Okay? Not be evil itself. And so those are examples of oppression and mind control and destruction of purpose, the silencing of the voice, destruction of relationship, and the crushing of personal power that constitutes systemic abuse. Another example she gives is about the Boy Scouts of America. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the Boy Scouts of America and the problems that they've had. And they're not just problems, they're major sin issues, major issues of evil and cover up. And says a recent report states that more than 12,000 Boy Scout members were victims of sexual abuse at the hands of almost 8,000 alleged perpetrators. Now, the stated purpose of Boy Scout America is to assist young men in making ethical and moral choices. She goes on to say, so, in order to protect their mission to teach young men to make ethical and moral choices, the organization itself made unethical and immoral choices to protect its own image. So instead of leading by example and saying, oh, wow, this abuse happened, we're going to make the ethical and moral choice right here. We're going to take this person, we're going to prosecute this person, make sure this person goes to prison. We're going to get therapy and counseling, provide that for the family, for this child in perpetuity for as long as they need it to make sure that they are, recover as best they can. They can heal from this, and then we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. No, instead we're going to cover this up. Why? Because we want to make sure that our image of making sure that these young men make good and moral choices, ethical and moral choices, is protected. Just the image. That continues on, and it says that so-called perversion files were kept by the Boy Scouts since the 1920s. So it's something that the Boy Scouts of America has been doing for a really long, long time. They've been protecting their own system against exposure, but at the expense of the very people it's supposed to serve. And that's where we have this problem. Going back to the quote that she has: "Systemic abuse applies when a system that is designed to serve people is instead destroying them." Right? Kind of like my car with the power steering pump. There's a problem with the pump, and it's if I didn't change it and still the car or whatever, it's gone. But if I don't change it, or let's say the valve cover gasket, if you know anything about a car, you have your valves, you have your engines working. There's oil there. That's where the main part where your oil pumps. Okay, and there's a cover for that. It's called the valve cover, and there's a gasket. That gasket's made out of rubber or silicone or whatever, and it keeps oil from leaking out of your engine. Oftentimes, common, it's annoying. The gasket will fail, and so oil will start to leak out of it. Now, that's designed to serve the system. It's designed to protect the system, right, from oil leakage. But when it starts to fail, if you choose to ignore it, oil is going to leak out. It's going to get into your ignition coils. That's where your spark plugs are. And then when you start your car, it's going to get into the fuel and the exhaust, and you're going to smell. That's when you smell people with burning oil, like they're driving the car. It's like, oh, it smells like they're burning gas or oil. That's what that is, right? It's actually kind of simple to fix. You got to go back. You got to change that one gasket. But if you don't, over time, your system is going to be damaged. For us, I didn't know what it was until I learned. But the oil seeped down to the engine. It got into the starter. The starter was all damaged. I had to change it. That's when I was like, "Oh, the starter's bad." I had to change the starter. I was like, "Wow, it's full of oil. What happened here?" Went back up to the top. Oh, wow, this valve cover gasket. That's what people are doing with each other. Instead of dealing with the problem, you're ignoring it or you're trying to cover it up in a way where it's like not happening, and then the whole system starts to have damage, and there's problems all over the place. That's the example he's giving here. Now, how an abusive system works. Now, I know this is really tiny and small. I apologize for that. I just wanted to get all the information to one slide if possible. But number one, leaders. You have a powerful, charismatic preacher, dominating father, right? The system can be, we're focusing more on the church here, but I just want to give one example. It could be a family as well, but it starts there. They're at the top, right? Leader, powerful, charismatic preacher. Number two, you have the insiders, the people who are in the know, the people that have influence on the leader and have influence on the decisions that are going to be made. And in a church, that's like the elders. If churches have board members or corporations, that can be the way. Wealthy donors, so on and so forth. In a family, person in the know is the mother, the father. If you have like one of the abusive um, parents that are going on, and that's why we talk about enabling in abusive families, abusive situations. That's the people in the know that also have influence who are, instead of stopping the abusive behavior, are making it easier to happen, right? And so, for example, like if a father is drunk and he's passed out, the wife calling in for him, hey, he's really sick today, instead of just letting it go, instead of saying, okay, you're going to deal with the consequences. You don't show up, your work's like, what's going on, you've got to deal with those problems yourself. Or even outright telling people, hey, yeah, he's sick today, but it's because he's hungover, he's drunk, whatever, right? We, instead of letting that happen and letting people know and exposing problems, we cover that up. We're enabling their sin and their behavior. That's just a sad fact about it. And so insiders are those people who will do that, and they'll also exert pressure on the system to preserve the system for their own benefit. Usually, people who are at the insider, especially in a church like elders, they're getting something out of the system. So even if the pastor or someone is someone who's abusive, they're getting money, they're getting personal gain benefits out of the system. So they have their own personal motivations for making sure that the system runs the way they need it to run. Then you have the followers. So you have those who they understand what the pastor's doing, they understand what the leadership's doing, they understand the abuse that's going on, but they think it's okay. They think it's right. They believe in the leadership. They believe in the position of that leadership, and they want to protect the leaders and want to protect their system as well. So they're not inside, so they're not so much as having like the influence on decisions and everyday events that are going on in a church specifically. You think about it that way, but they do have the ability to talk to others, anybody who might have doubt, and try to convince them that their doubt is wrong, right? Then you have the blind, you have those who turn their blind eyes. So the abuse is happening, but they just like, I don't know, I don't really know. If they hear about the abuse, they don't know what's going on. It's like that can't be true, that can't be happening, so on and so forth. They turn a blind eye to it all, right? And then who not listed here are number five would be uh, those who are being abused, those who recognize the abuse, those who say something about the abuse, and they're the ones who are being ignored by the blind. They're the ones who are being corrected by the followers, right? They're the ones who, if they go to the leadership, are getting pressure put on them to stop what they're saying or what they're doing. If the leadership gets involved, or the ultimate leader, all all sense of independence and decision making is going to be blasted out of them. So if a wife goes to the leadership and to say that her husband, who's also an elder, is abusing her at home, right? Let's say they talk to one person at church, the blind person's like, no, are you sure that's what happening? It's what's happening. Are you sure? I mean, maybe you made him upset. I don't really want to get involved. Walk away. The follower, you go to that person, oh, my husband's doing this. That person will say, well, they know what the leadership position will be, so they'll start laying the groundwork. Like, well, the scripture talks about divorce, and divorce is not permitted. I think you should talk to the pastor about it, but I think that's probably what he's going to tell you. And you probably got to find a way to forgive, and you got a way to let that go, and so on and so forth. And they go to leadership, they go to eldership, and that's exactly the same kind of message they get from there, but it's going to be even stronger. The leader's going to say, listen, I am telling you to go back to your husband, to be a faithful wife, stop upsetting him, do what he's asking you to do, so on and so forth. Like that's the kind of language they use, right? So that's how that would work in that system. Extremely sad, frustrating, but it's what happens in a lot of places, a lot of churches. Okay. And so ultimately, I love this quote here. It says, the system is for the people. The people do not serve the system. And Dr. Langberg pointed out some scripture portions here. But what I want to do now is, I mentioned the video that fits into what we just talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and switch scenes here, and I want to show this video. Now, this is a pastor who is known to be not a great guy. He has a very bad reputation, a poor reputation, I should say. If you want to know more about it, you can look him up. You can read his Wikipedia. Pastor Steve Anderson, the Fundamentalist Baptist Church I believe, in Arizona. The guy is so full of vitriol and hatred that he's been banned from entering a number of countries. You can look at his Wikipedia page, Pastor Steve Anderson. But we're going to look here at an example of what systemic abuse looks like when it starts at the top, and you're going to see the followers, and then you're going to see those who are supporting in the leadership or whatever. And then if we watch it enough times, you might see those people who are just like kind of looking at each other, what do we do here? And they decide to turn a blind eye, right? And the situation, just in case you don't hear it too well, what's going on, and I really hope the audio works. I've been testing it, pretty sure it will. But what's happening is, what's going to start out with is a guy is going to approach the pastor, and what it sounds like he's asking for is prayer, and maybe he wants to read something and ask for prayer. Now, I've been in churches where this kind of thing happens, And I've been in churches where the pastor is like, okay, come up here. I've also been in churches where there are people who do this kind of thing and they have a habit of doing it often, and they kind of monopolize the time, and then maybe they say things they shouldn't say. One time we were in Bible study, or it was Wednesday night prayer meeting, and I remember this guy got up and started talking about how we were in Ocala, how Ocala is the Sun City. It's like their nickname or whatever. And he said, well, it's not just SUN, it's SON, right? And at that point, some of the older men in the church just got up and were like, okay, you need to go, right? It goes a little off. And so sometimes that'll happen, right? So all that context put into place, I think you can see what happens here doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do more with this leader's desire to have power and control over his congregation, over his system, right? You're going to see that in his response, in his anger, and the kinds of words that he uses here.
Hey, sit down. Sit down. What are you coming up here to do? You want to come take over the service?
No, I don't want
huh?
to take over the service.
What do you want? What?
I just want a prayer, Ed.
Get out of here.
Can I get a little grace?
No, you can't. No, you get out of here. Get him out of here. Drag this bozo out. Pull him out. Hey, help him out. Get him out. And you know what? If anybody wants to come up here and take over the service,
the men who got up to pull
we'll throw you out of here, buddy. This church is not a free-for-all. This isn't an open mic. This isn't a karaoke bar.
Now listen to what he's
Okay?
saying, but also
I'm the
pay
man
attention
of
to
God
some of the
here.
actions people
I
have.
meet the qualifications. I run this church, and if you don't like it, then get out. This is not some church where every first-time visitor and brand new believer and people who've never even read the Bible are going to come up and take over the service. Not happening. Okay? If you want that kind of watered-down leadership, go to some house church with your Amish buddies and sit around the coffee table with your coffee clutch. This is a New Testament church. We have a bishop here. We have an overseer here. Like it or lump it. And if you don't like it, feel free to get up and leave the service at any time. If 50% of people walk out, I don't care. Because you know what? I'm not going to pastor a oneness cult. Amen. I'm not going to pastor a Pentecostal church. I'm the pastor of a Baptist church. Amen. And if you're not a Baptist, then get out. Amen.
And we end there. Now, bear with me as I switch back to our scripture passage. What I want to look at is something in Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 7, starting with verse 3. Thus says Adonai Sabaoth. I don't know if it's right. It means the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. Mend your ways and your deeds, and I will let you live in this place. Do not trust in deceptive words and say, the temple of Adonai, the temple of Adonai, the temple of Adonai. No, if you truly mend your ways and your deeds, if you're doing justice between a man and his neighbor, not oppressing the sojourner, orphan, and widow, nor shedding innocent blood in this place, nor going after other gods to your own ruin, then I will let you dwell in this place in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever. Look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are empty. Will you steal, murder, and commit adultery and perjury, and offer incense to Baal and walk after other gods whom you have not known? And then come and stand before me in this house that bears my name, saying, we are saved, that you may keep doing all these abominations. Has this house, which bears my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Look, even I have seen it. It is a declaration of Adonai. And sorry, I forgot to switch over. So as I see this video, and I see what happens often in churches, the systemic abuse that happens, a lot of parallels and similarities. And Dr. Langberg is one who points out this passage. And I should point out verse 4. Don't fool yourself and say, I'm in the temple. I'm in the temple. Like he was saying there, this is a church. We're in a church. This is a Baptist church. Like, what does that mean? Right? To stand in a place and to declare where you are, but then at the same time, your actions reflect the deeds of evil. And or evil deeds. And so you look at, how he treated this man, how he kicked him out of there. And again, I don't know the history. Maybe the guy is crazy. Maybe the guy is nuts, right? But if that happens and he says some crazy stuff and that's what he normally does, and he's like, "Oh guys, we need to like strip naked and go jump in a pool and then God will bless us," and you're like, "Oh, this guy again. Okay, I need to get this guy out of here." And they say, "Okay, folks, if you haven't been here before, this guy is someone who comes up here. He's got some mental health issues and he says some crazy things. And we want to welcome him here, but at some point we have to take him out when he's out of control like this." No, that's not what happened, right? He's yelling, I'm the man of God in this place, and this is not a oneness church, although it is a type of cult. If you read more about it, it's certainly problematic. The kinds of power and control that he has over his congregation, the kinds of things that he says, the kinds of things that he promotes and teaches, and the reason why he's banned from like 30 something nations he's not allowed to travel to. Basically, he's stuck here in the U.S. And how does that happen? Because we deceive each other is a previous thing, but also the system is protecting itself, right? And anybody who sat there, maybe the person who recorded thought it was weird, right? Maybe that one person says something, and everyone else is going to turn a blind eye. The followers are going to tell him you're disobedient. He just said it. Like, what is it? The fear of being called out, the fear of being seen. Why? If I was there, I would like to say I would have left. I probably would have left before that, but if I was there, I would like to say I would have left. But there's something about our human nature where we're in a system that is abusive and we stay stuck in it. Now, a big part of that are the families we come out of. If the families we come out of teach us, reflect to us, and have given us a design where we are familiar with abuse and so we're comfortable with it, then it's going to be hard for us to leave, right? That's why, like, I got my master's degree in counseling psychology, but all that time, I didn't choose psychology, but all that time was me learning about all the ways that were unhealthy and all the ways I don't want to be. My wife went through her own process as well. When we got married, we went through a process that was intentional, in which we wanted to design a family that was going to be different from the one that we went through, that was not going to be abusive. We didn't want to have that kind of existence. And no matter how many children we have, we only have the one. We were going to be different. And not just for the sake of being different, but intentionally different. We learned what was abusive, what wasn't right, how to correct it, and how to move forward. Okay. And that way our system can serve our family the way it's supposed to serve, the way it was designed to, as I mentioned earlier. So that's the last slide I have there. And so what I wanted to do now is just look at Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3. Now, this is what the system is supposed to look like, right? This is what the community is how the community is going to function, right? Not when do we meet? Supposed to meet on Sabbath, or we're supposed to meet on, Saturday night or Sunday morning, or what do our meetings look like, or do women speak, or whatever. Like, I don't want to get into any of that. All the stuff is where people abuse each other, okay, through that kind of control. But real basic, verse 12, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves in tender compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other if anyone has a grievance against one another. Just as the Lord pardoned you, so you must also pardon others. But above all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfect harmony. Let the shalom, the peace of Messiah, rule in your hearts. To this shalom you were surely called in one body. Also be thankful. Let the word of Messiah dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another with all wisdom in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Yeshua, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So what is the community supposed to look like? That right there. And as we looked at Jesus, we saw, we looked at the example from Mark chapter 3. And of course, he's Jesus. Like, how can I compare myself to him? But there are a number of people throughout history that are an example of this one thing, and that is the power of one person standing up against a corrupt system, an abusive system, to say something about the abuse that's going on. For Jesus, it led to his crucifixion, right? He got up, he wanted to heal the person whose hand was withered. He showed an act of mercy, an act of kindness, an act of love, an act that saves a life, that falls in line with what do I do on the Sabbath? Follow this rule, save the life. He did that. And it led to the plotting, and they said they want to do and destroy. How are we going to destroy this man, right? Whether it's physically or just his reputation, whatever, but they went out to destroy him. He was one person, but he did it. And he started a whole new movement. He's one person, he's also God, he did it, right? Dr. Langberg here mentions a couple people who had the same example, and it's actually how she closes this chapter, and it's why I'm going there as well. She talked about William Wilberforce. If you saw the movie Amazing Grace, how he started the whole we got to end the slavery thing starting in England. You have Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a voice against the Nazis in Germany and what they were doing to the Jewish people. And if you know the history, like the church went along with that. In a lot of Hitler's speeches, he was appealing to Christians and Christianity and like getting back their country and all that kind of stuff. And so they went with it. And Bonhoeffer, who had an influential voice in the church at that time, to say, no, this is not what we're supposed to be doing. This is wrong. And so he wrote that book on discipleship. That's amazing. I highly recommend it. And so the power of one voice. So I recommend to myself, to read this passage, Colossians chapter 3, as often as possible, and to see, no matter what my church is doing, if my church is allowing women to speak or not, or they have female pastors, or they they meet on a Sunday night instead of Sunday morning, or the services, whatever the logistics are of the meeting. Can you say that what's going on between the people, the relationships and the communities in the system, is it looking like this? Is it compassionate? Is it loving? Is it kind? Is it humble? Is it gentle? Did you see that in the video with this pastor Scott Anderson, Steve Anderson, whatever his name is? Is that what you're seeing there? What I just read? Or are you seeing something else? That's how we judge and look at what's going on around us, and not judge in the sense like we're judging people. He's going to hell. I don't know. I don't know where he's going. I'm not going to do that. But Jesus did say you have to be able to perceive and see when a fruit from a tree is bad, and so you know that tree is bad, and so you must deal with a bad tree, right? And what is the fruit supposed to look like? This is what it looks like. This is what good fruit looks like. This is what a good community, a healthy community, looks like. So I'm going to end there. We're closing up on almost 50 minutes, so hopefully that was more than enough information. I think that's plenty to talk about how power works in human systems and what can you do. Well, you can be that one person. Okay, I've left situations that were abusive. I've also been in situations where I speak up against it, speak for those who are being abused, and I understand how hard it is, but how the change happens. Like with Jesus, you change one heart here, you change one heart there. Eventually, like-minded and like-hearted people come together and say, okay, we're going to just go ahead and leave that system together, and we're gonna be this community we were meant to be. It's happened throughout history, ever since Jesus, and we can be that as well with each other, right? We can be that voice, and that's really the point of this ministry, is to reach out to like-minded, like-hearted people. And so, if you know more people who have been through abuse in the church, I ask you again humbly to share this with them. It might be a help to them. I'm also willing to talk to anybody out there who needs to talk about the abuse you've been through, in a counseling kind of way. It would be free. It wouldn't be any kind of charge to you at all. Just if you need somebody you want to share things with, that will finally say, I believe you. Not turn a blind eye to it, but finally say, I believe you. With that, I think I'll end in prayer. And I will say, I believe we're going to continue on each day now. We've come up with a new system so that I have my time in the mornings to prepare. And so we should be getting this done on a regular basis. But I'm going to go ahead and pray. Father in God, in heaven, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the opportunity to have this ministry. I pray, Lord God, that you would bless those who are listening to these words with a deeper and more meaningful relationship with you. That'd be my main goal. And so that's my prayer for them, that they would have a deeper and more meaningful relationship with you. And what that means, Father, is that all the abuse that they've gone through or anything that they've been through that might have taken away from their relationship with you, that you would strip that all away and help them to reconnect in a way that's healthier, more understanding of the fact that the abuse they suffered or the evil that they went through wasn't because of you, but because of the systems that people have been using over the centuries to control others and people in control. And that's not at all what you intended. I pray, Lord God, that you would speak to them now and comfort them and help them to recover and heal from the past. We look forward, God, to what you're doing through this ministry, and I pray that you'd help it to reach more people that it needs to be reached, and just those who need to be reached. And I pray, Lord God, that you would protect us all and watch over us and encourage us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you again for watching.